The Foreign Intelligence Service, or SVR, is Russia's primary external intelligence agency. The SVR is the successor of the first Chief Directorate, FCD, of the KGB, as of December 1991. Vladimir is famous for its unique white stone cathedrals, towers, and palaces. Unlike any other northern buildings, their exteriors are elaborately carved with high-relief stone sculptures. Only 3 of these edifices stand today: the Assumption Cathedral, the Cathedral of St. Demetrios, and the Golden Gate. It is also the home of the secondary SVR, a misnomer, for it was here that many of the more outrageous plots were hatched, planned, and carried out. Anton and Sergei had recruited and managed the insertion of the best of the Soviet-era nuclear scientists into the secret Iranian nuclear bomb facility, one that Iran was recently forced to reveal. Anton and Sergei were now busy getting the Russian scientists back out, coordinating it through Anna, for just about everything went through Anna. The SVR had a mole in its building, one who had so far revealed the existence of the Iranian nuclear plant, but not yet the hand of Russia therein, nor the S-500 anti-aircraft system being installed that would protect the plant from destruction. Therefore, the SVR building had been put under lockdown. All transmissions and phones stopped, but for one. Colonel Patov, the de facto and continuing head of the SVR in Vladimir, pondered the graveness of the situation, now wishing that he'd never had to run the damn place. The former commander, the merciless General Burkov, had been done away with by Frederick in San Francisco a few years back. A worldwide manhunt had produced nothing. Burkov had been replaced by General Nikitin, a man who ran the SVR remotely and very poorly at that, one who had never even bothered to have set foot in the place, preferring the comforts of Moscow in the new digital age of armchair management. Patov sat back. He'd been given a week to find the mole, must show progress in 2 days. He didn't miss Burkov, that crazy son of a bitch, but he missed Nikitin strangely, having never met him, for it was all too lonely at the top here now. But what the hell, for Nikitin had always taken all the credit for Patov's fine work. To blazes with them all and their kind, he thought. Who is spilling our secrets? Not me, that's for sure. He thought of his wife, Patova. They usually added Anna. Perhaps they could run away from this thing, but no, the Russians left no survivors for events like this. Yet, Patov had already secretly moved his finances to Switzerland, knowing well how to circumvent the ever-present prying eyes. Anna had worked her way up, over 20 years or so, to a position of much importance, the coordinator of all activities. She was pure Soviet Russian from birth, reliable and untouchable, even having a golden heart. She was also a member of the Ninja Empire, their deepest plant anywhere. It was the end, she knew, for there was no micromanaging of this kind of leak, as had been done with the others, to make it appear otherwise. There was no way out. Duty now spelled death. Nor could she shift the blame to Anton or Sergei. That just wouldn't be right. Still, she would try to hold out, perhaps think of something. Her mind drew a blank. Patov paced his office, then called upon his major, Igorov, for company. Anything not to have to go through this alone. They finally decided to put all 3 suspects through the rigors of the new and improved truth serum process that had never failed, although a few had died from it. Not Anna, Igorov protested. Yes, Anna too, commanded Patov. I know, but we must be sure. See you in the morning. Morning had dawned all too soon for Colonel Patov, now drinking a cup of strong black coffee to jolt him back into the day from a very restless night. He read the report. What? All 3 had passed the truth test. Then it was given again, and all 3 had passed it again. Major Igorov entered, saying, "We double-checked the computers. Only those 3 had access, and you, of course, but you did not do it." "Why not suspect me, Igorov?" "Because I was sent here to keep an eye on you, Colonel, and it was not you." "Thank you, Igorov, at least in this case anyway, for spying on me." "My pleasure to vindicate you, sir." "But they are all pure-blood Soviets." "Who then?" "It can only be one of them, sir." The phone rang, displaying the name Nikitin. Patov jumped out of his chair. "What does he want? I thought I had 2 days for progress." Patov lifted the receiver and listened. As one must do when a superior calls, just saying, "understood," before hanging up rather than being hung up upon. Igorov, our S-500 anti-aircraft construction site has now been revealed to the world. There is such a project? Yes, to protect the Iranian nuclear plant. It's but 1/3 completed, though. What to do? Make it look like it was abandoned. Put dust on it, whatever. Get our people out of there immediately. Will do, sir. And Igorov, one more thing. Yes? We now have but one more day to find the mole, or Nikitin is coming here tomorrow to personally execute all 3 suspects. Damn, we need these people. It's the old way, Igorov, the sure way. I'll try, sir. No try do. Maybe Nikitin leaked the information himself. Unlikely. He's an old hardliner, and if he did, there's nothing we can do about it. Agreed. Find that mole or I'm dead. Yes, sir? There was no progress during day, even after Patov had personally and intensely interviewed all 3 suspects. Exhausted, Patov went to sleep early, sending nothing to Moscow. General Nikitin's armored limo pulled up outside the SVR building around 3 a.m., its flags flying. Major Igorov, being on night duty, received their demands at the front door and went up at once to wake Pavlov. You have to get up, sir. Nikitin is here. What? In the middle of the night? Yes, sir. Tell them we're under lockdown. No one comes in. They're waiting outside. And no one goes out. I had to bring the 3 suspects out. What? I could hardly disobey them, sir. Well then, what else do they want? You, sir. Me? They insist, immediately, and as you are. Igorov, take over. You will not see me alive again. Pavlov was already a beaten man, an inmate waiting on death row, and so he, dazed as he had become, collected a few personal items and went out into the street in his night clothes. The limo door opened, he got in. A general of the Russian army was sitting there in full uniform, looking most unhappy. The limo sped off, no one saying a word as all the while the miles passed on by through the empty city streets. Patov knew to stay silent unless spoken to. He noted the outskirts of the city passing, and yet no one said anything. The country kilometers now eating up the limo with their darkness. A perfect spot for an execution, he thought. Patov couldn't take it anymore. Where are you taking me, Nikitin? He bellowed, no answer. Patov stayed quiet, thinking better of his outburst. They stopped at an old farmhouse, pulled the limos inside, got out, and lit a small candle. So, this is it, figured Patov. No one spoke. Nikitin lit up a smoke and offered one to Patov, who gladly took it and lit it up to calm his nerves. Halfway through the smoke, Nikitin leaned in as if to speak. The face somehow seemed familiar, but Patov couldn't place it. Colonel Patov, said Nikitin very slowly, you transferred all your funds. No one could know this, thought Patov, but they did. For safekeeping. To use after you'd escaped this mess? No. It was no use. They had him. Another long silence ensued. Remember the tunnel, Patov? Patov was really confused now. What tunnel? The one under the train tracks. Patov strained his memory. So many incidents over the years. Then he began to recall some bits and pieces of it. I'm not exactly sure. Remember, it's lights out for me? Ah, yes, you reached up and smashed the only light bulb in the tunnel, leaving your sweater hanging there in the dark to fool us. Then you escaped. You are Frederick. I am. You should have shot me on sight. I couldn't. I know. And you've come to dispose of me? Like you did Burkov? No, that was a different case. He sure was. Burkov was a madman. You, Patov, were just doing your job. Then where are you taking me? To Switzerland, where you can meet up with your money and your wife. My wife? Yes, she's in the rear partition of the second limo. You would do this for me, one who once tried to capture you? Is this some kind of a trick? Well, you can't stay in Russia now, can you? And we will let bygones be bygones. Pardon my Russian, but it means that all is forgiven and forgotten. Petova stepped out and embraced her husband. Patov looked up and over at Frederick, finally asking, all this in exchange for what I know?
Frederick smiled. We already know most of what you know. You are free, Colonel Patov? Is there such a word in Russian? Yes, but at least I will bring you up to date. I know, Patov. Just let it sink in while we get you some traveling clothes. Patov returned to his chair and sank into it. no longer fully knowing how or who to trust. Patov added, "Anna must work for you, Frederick." "She does, and she is now safe within the limo." "And the other two? They have to come along." "I see." Anna stepped out and walked over to Patov. Patov looked up and said, "Ah, Golden Heart, I knew it had to be you. You were not meant for this cruel line of work, Patov. I put in a good word for you." "Thank you," said Patov, almost crying now. "My treat. If I may ask, how did you get the information out? All the emails, phones and such are monitored every second. We even look at strange conversations for unusual word use." "That would be telling." "Really?" "It's beyond all that." "That's not possible, is it?" Frederick looked at a secure readout on his phone, indicating that Operation Fire was now underway. A few moments ago, the Israeli defense minister had been on the phone to the American president, who replied, just before hanging up, "Thanks for the notice and Godspeed." 6 Israeli jets were already in the air, 1 far out in front, 3 in the middle and 2 lagging back, all of them quickly approaching the Iranian border. The defense minister and his aides had gathered around the computer screens. "We almost waited too long," said one. "The S-500 site is partly operational, although they are now covering it with dirt to hide it." "It can still operate through the dirt." "Yes, indeed. Why did we wait for a madman to come through on his public promise to destroy us?" "Yes, especially when such a boast would only make our actions tonight all the more necessary and right in the eyes of the world. We are getting soft. Maybe. Iran is even isolated from its Muslim neighbors. Insanity. The jets have crossed the border, sir."
The S-500 anti-aircraft system came to life through the dirt, noting one blip and taking out the lead Israeli aircraft. But it was only a drone, carrying no one and nothing of interest but a missile now tracking out of the debris and down through the sky toward the S-500 site, its approach obscured at first. They will never see it coming. They will glory in the kill and will not even be checking their radars for a second or two. They didn't, and so a large part of the S-500 apparatus was soon destroyed, the next 3 jets finishing the job and continuing on, the 2 jets in the rear now closing through the freed sky. "What's with those last 2 jets, sir? Are they special?" "Ah, you do not have security clearance for that." "Indeed I do." "Yes, you do. I am joking. Suppose that our bunker buster missiles do not complete the job, the Iranian site being too deep, as it is rumored to be." "Then they could salvage it, and if it was far enough along in its enrichment process." "Yes." "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Yes." "The first wave is at the target, sir, and dumping the bunker busters. Get me the live satellite on my screen. Analysis? Those lines are the depths reached by the bunker busters, sir. That block still beneath is the nuclear plant as newly illuminated by a special probe that we sent in first." "No good, was it?" "The busters did not reach the target, sir." The defense minister transmitted a code to the last 2 jets, and then bowed his head in prayer. All waited. "They've dropped their nukes, sir, fighting fire with fire." Frederick received an update. "Gentlemen, ladies, and Colonel Patov and wife, we've entered a new age. The area of the Iranian nuclear plant and its surroundings will be uninhabitable for several centuries to come." "God save us all," cried Patov. Major Igorov took temporary command of the SVR. He would later find that his command continued, for the real Nikitin had mysteriously disappeared, and no one would ask any questions of this, it being the old Soviet way. Igorov now sat at Patov's desk, ready for the tasks to come. He took a rare moment to break character and smiled to himself. No improved truth serum injections had actually happened, for he'd only gone through the motions. He would carry on Anna's legacy, for he too was a member of the Ninja Empire. Throughout the day we sat beside a brook, reading with life its most wonderful book, then slept with each other in a sweet nook, and this of her and me was all it took. Art and poetry enrich human experience, but they're no substitutes for the living of it. Like Keats' figures on the urn, should we live life less? No, because what is deathless is also lifeless. Raskol placed a call to the head of Mossad, which is the Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations, being the National Intelligence Agency of Israel. It seems that Iranian scientists are disappearing, That much is going wrong in their nuclear plants, and that many of the needed shipments are not arriving. Do you know anything about that? Who, me? No, nothing, but we know even less than nothing about some other problems that they are having. Do you know anything about those? No, not a thing. Thanks, now we both know something. Good work, you too. Questor and Passiona recently addressed the new recruits. No matter what agencies we use or blend into, we are the Ninja Empire, and can act as that alone, going where governments and even CIAs cannot go, as we are not a nation, nor represent any in particular. This is why our Grandmaster is higher than the leaders of all countries. We do good only for the sake of good, performing the task and then getting out, not even sticking around to enjoy the scenery. Your reward is the satisfaction of a job well done, along with shelter, food and travel. We have chosen many from the martial arts as they have great discipline of body and mind. We do not kill innocent bystanders if they've seen our faces. In fact, we don't kill them at all. We use 2 backup teams, not just one, but they rarely come into play. That is where you will start.
The Taliban's top leader, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, has been captured by American and Pakistani intelligence teams. This arrest has been confirmed by unnamed US officials and 2 Taliban figures. Despite the Taliban not signing the Geneva Convention, the US has called in the NIA to question the prisoners without resorting to torture. Through this interrogation, they have discovered information about nuclear material being brought into the US. However, the cell involved is self-contained, making it difficult to contact them. Meanwhile, Analog, the Southern Field Commander of the Ninja Empire, has been alerted to the sinking of a Coast Guard drug interdiction vessel off the coast of Texas. His aide, Time Particle, believes that this event is unusual and suspects that either a large amount of drugs or something more potent is being brought into the country. Analog suggests using their new satellite system, which has super high-definition video capabilities. Time Particle is impressed and asks if it has photos better than Google Earth. Analog explains that it can capture HD video of the entire Gulf and southern region, but the storage is reused after a few days due to the large amount of data. They decide to review the footage and discover that the Coast Guard vessel was sunk by 2 speedboats and the attackers are now fleeing at high speed. They fast forward the video to track the speedboats to their landing point. Analog requests oversight and control of the laser satellite, but it is currently on the other side of the world. Instead, he asks for a live stealth bomber, which is already in the region and under NIA control. Time Particle informs Analog that the attackers have reached the Texas shore and are loading something into a white van. They pinpoint the van and continue to follow it in real time with the help of Nihao, who grants them ultimate authority to proceed. The voiceover ends with Time Particle reporting that the attackers have entered Houston proper.
Holy Christ, I need 100 cement trucks. Alert Houston police pursuit, but have them stay back, slowing all traffic. The terrorists might get scared and detonate, and we're not quite ready yet. Redirect the stealth jet, highest priority. Have the counter-terrorism official at the next toll booth take a special reading on that van. Get me the US president. Meanwhile, ironically, at Capitol Hill, the politicians are again raising a fuss about the severe prisoner interrogation techniques. Sir, the van ran the toll booth, but we got a reading that the nuclear device is live and armed. Damn, that means they are approaching their target very soon. NASA? It would appear to be. Evacuate the area to the east first. How's our jet doing? Com. They're in the area, having just pulled out of Mach 4, just about ready. Here's a direct connection to the pilot. Pilot, the nuclear emergency has been verified. Do not hit the van directly, the device is armed. Blast some bunker buster holes just ahead of the van, such that it will plunge into one of them. Execute at will. Over. Com. The cement trucks are on the way. General Rascal likes your plan. Have the police pursuit stop and block all lanes to stop all the traffic behind the van. The traffic ahead of it will be able to just move on in time. Com. I have the US President. Mr. President, NIA requests you to prepare for DEFCON 3, as we may very soon have a nuclear explosion within Houston city limits if we can't stop it. The president, will do, have been following. The stealth bomber bore down upon the speeding van like a giant bird of prey, blasting 3 holes in the freeway just in front of it, the van soon plunging into the first one. The jet sent a few missiles nearby, some of which caused some debris to partly fill the hole the van was in. Nuclear explosion? No, not yet. They were still 3 minutes from NASA. Keep the area clear. We have an underground nuclear blast confirmed. Low megatons. The wind is still out of the west. There's not much population there. Ah, good luck. Indeed. This should end some of those discussions in DC. Let's video backtrack those speedboats whence they came. Get on it. Rascal had had enough with the terrorists, the last straw being the nuclear attempt on NASA. He ordered all operatives to terminate all the suspects not in custody that they'd identified from observation and their insiders' information. Lloyd looked stunned, for his subjectives were massed in the cauldron towns of Miran Shah and Mirali, the very epicenters of extremist activity, the ultimate boomtowns of terror in Pakistan's belt of militants. He thought of renting a yacht for a sham of a party, but it wasn't their style. Alerting his insider, Lloyd dressed as a dervish, for he could otherwise hardly blend in, and awaited a special celebration after services in which he was to whip them into a frenzy of subjective hatred for anything non-Islamic. He had completed 2 slow whirls, the build-up to further acceleration, drawing all eyes wrapped upon him, turning ever faster on one leg. Out of his cloak came his submachine gun, it firing round and round as he twirled, his insider watching and taking care of trouble, the militant terrorists all falling dead, their dreams of virgins shattered. Enough is enough.
When all of Florida went under, being that it was already sea level, the world woke up, but it was much too late. A year later, every coastal city in the world had been inundated, for water always finds its way in. Northern Canada, along with its eastern and western sections, was no more. Only the now more temperate interior remained dry, it filling up with more and more people and tropical birds by the day. Cynthia had moved to the cabin, for Lake Ontario was acting up. A small portion of Siberia was usable too for now, and an iffy part of Argentina. Alaska was gone to its mountains, as were Central and Latin America and Mexico. The heat was melting the ice caps. The equatorial regions had become unbearable, the temperatures now reaching 135 degrees F. Most of these people really had no place to go. The pace of the disaster was startling, exceeding even the grimmest of predictions. Australia's population, being mostly coastal, had retreated to the thin edge between its useless interior and the deep blue sea. Greybeard was holding on, being one who was acclimated to extremes, as well as to living off the land. He'd climbed a sturdy tree when the tidal wave swept inland, perching there for a day, until the waters had receded enough for him to slog his way home. His tiny car with its 2-horsepower engine had been washed away, but he still had the big one at home. His ranch was soggy but otherwise secure. The great inland sea reappeared, then evaporated, and then returned. Meteorology had become a fruitless science. Summer was now year-round. He readied his camping gear just in case. The Yukon was a mess too, yet Label Wench as well was a survivor. The dogs had been leashed, the sled provisioned. Cars could not brave the mud and the slush, so she was off on the ultimate Yukon quest, with her sled and dogs. Whitehorse was dying. Prof Pat was fine where he was, although the Great Lakes were enlarging even with their locks having been closed, for the water runneth over. All this from a Bindu dot, he thought. Resistance was futile, for water was slippery stuff, its tiny hydrogen atoms easily rolling around the oxygen. Various schemes and solutions had been endlessly debated, most of them being as tough on mankind as the heat, the rest of them unattainable. It was all happening much too quickly. The estimates had been way off. Nature was now a dragon, and she had roared and was spewing her fiery breath upon her own fragile planet.
Some tried to live in basements, but the heat found them. Some dug underground, but the floods came. Many near extinctions had happened before, one being only 74,000 years ago when, at Toba in northern Sumatra, a supervolcano erupted. 6 years of volcanic winter followed this eruption, bringing pre-humans to the very edge of elimination. There were but a few thousand of them left around, since very little light could reach the dusty ground. It took 20,000 years for them to recompose from the cauldron of fire that had almost brewed humanity away. It was from this handful of hardy souls that we modern humans arose. Back to the heat. Due to the intense global warming and ice melting that was about to reach a runaway exponential point, the weather patterns had been greatly altered and were bringing numerous and severe storms all over the globe, causing much interior flooding, plus wiping out most of the crops. The rate of destruction was becoming astronomical. No one could keep up with it. It was everyone for themselves. 2012 had long since passed without incident, and now it was 2024. Millions had perished in a matter of a few weeks, and there was little government infrastructure working save for the covert ninja empire. However, humans were hardly a match for nature gone wild. It could and would only get worse unto the end. Back in 1960, Bob Christensen had looked around everywhere at the Yellowstone National Park grounds for its volcanic caldera but had found it nowhere. By some coincidence, NASA had photos from a recently tested high-altitude camera. Astounded, Bob learned why he failed to spot the caldera. It was virtually the entire park, 2.2 million acres of area. Yellowstone must have blown up with a violent misery far beyond anything known throughout our history. The crater was 40 miles across. There was also a huge gap in the mountain chain. The cataclysm had been even beyond the scale of what imaginations could have dreamt up. It had thousands of times more monstrous molten fire than Mount St. Helens. Krakatoa was but a firecracker in comparison. Yellowstone's eruptions average one really massive blow every 600,000 years, the last one 630,000 years ago. So it was long overdue and perhaps pending, but still, that could be thousands of years off. The ninja leaders and their teams flew into Niihau on their last tanks of gas, there to take sanctuary and a vote for a desperate but uncertain plan. The landing strip now had quite a tricky slope to it. Many near extinctions had occurred before, but none in modern times. However, death seemed to be a way of life throughout history. Of all extinctions, the Permian was the largest, happening 245 million years ago, when 95% of species perished, suddenly disappearing from the fossil recording. Life had almost come to a total obliterationing. That we are even here was due to the dinosaurs and 90% of all the species being wiped out. A small and nervous shrew-like creature looked out. The dinosaurs, the forever kings of the earth, were gone. The shrews attached to a favorable evolutionary line. Every single one of our forebears on both sides survived, they being attractive enough to locate a loving mate with whom they're loved to celebrate.
In the late 1700s, Cuvier could take heaps of bones and whip them into shapely forms not in the stones. After for the first time a theory on extinction, in which some groups of creatures became history. This raised uncomfortable implications at the time. Why would God create and destroy without reason or rhyme? This suggested an unaccountable casualness by someone chain of being, which held that the world was carefully ordered for us, and that every living thing thus had a place, and fossils in rocks to find the relative rock ages that were possible. At every change in rock strata, certain fossils vanished, while in others they carried on into subsequent levels. It was extinct not only occasionally but repeatedly. Right hostile distinction, more than the biblical Noachian deluge distinction's extinction. Of course, now we see nature more for what it is. Back to the Future. It no longer mattered that humans were on a one-way trip from the quantum fluke. On Nihao, Frederick walked the last mile. The world's roulette wheel was rolling 00 on what might soon be the last perfect day on Earth. And a hurricane was headed in his direction. Tsunamis washed deeper and deeper inland. Most of the internet no longer functioned. ToeQuest and Avoid were gone, their archives destroyed. Nobody had returned, his efforts at changing the future having been unsuccessful. Robert gave up his dreams of the Toe. The Toe Center on Oahu had closed. Graham finally levitated up into the air, his new refuge above the clouds. Trish #1 East energized her way to the Forbidden Island. The top dragon, Old Rascal, as #1 West, awaited them all. A rainbow appeared as the spirit of Old Grandmaster West, flying through past them as the scent on the breeze and the courage to act. The votes had been counted. Rascal had now engaged the last working silo. Trish keyed in the codes and nodded to him, saying, "Would you like to do the honors?" "Yes, for unto me falls life's last duty. Nature will now have to contend with herself. It will be fire versus ice, dragon against dragon, just as shown by the picture on the Great Wall. However, this could well be the end for all of us." "Or not if it works," she answered. "Or global warming will be defeated by the worldwide dust in the atmosphere. The years will tell. It is our only hope." Rascal pressed the button. Nuclear missiles were being fired deep into the heart of the Yellowstone caldera. At least 5 surrounding states and 2 Canadian provinces would be completely destroyed. Yet, winter would come, probably bringing its own array of problems. But then, after that, could spring be far behind?
Back in Hawaii in 1970, a rainbow was about to appear. Something that was truly only in the eye of the beholder, for it appeared only where it was for each particular person. "Strange," Passiona said. "I felt as if I was experiencing the rainbow for the first time." "Perhaps you were," I replied, unknowing of nobody at that time. But now I realized that I had seen him whizzing by on his way to the CMBR and the butterflies on the edge of forever, so I wrote, "Some may ask of life, how does one find love? Life says, be still, don't look far above, stop, let love's butterfly alight on you, for that's the touch that romance is made of. The rose is the flower that the bee cruises, meeting there the butterfly that love chooses. They unfold the petals of the blossom, and drink the nectar of love's sweet juices. The scent of plumeria perfumed the night airs ever more intensely, drenching us in its fragrance as we went to sleep to enjoy our new all-night cable channel of dreams. The mountaintop retreat granted serenity in a crazy world, but Okinawa soon called for an army supply system update, and so I picked up the tapes and 2 first-class tickets, one for me and one for the tapes to have their own seat, for I could never let them out of my sight for even a millisecond. I had taken a course in security and military intelligence and been granted a high-level clearance and had to carry a pistol. Of course, I even had to take the computer tapes to the bathroom with me, washing them and my hands as well. So we put the tapes in the overhead storage bin as Passiona settled into the seat next to mine. During the flight, I read a book on anti-gravity. I couldn't put it down. I asked my companion, "What's holding this airplane up?" For she was excellent in science. "A wing and a prayer," she replied. One of Austin's wilder theories of everything, fundamental possibility exists and is the ultimate basis of reality, and has always existed since nothing can become of nothing. It is fundamentally every possibility at once in superposition. Note that a fundamental particular state of something was totally impossible, for how could the choice have been made? A fundamental state of nothingness was totally impossible too, for there is indeed something that our consciousness interprets. Fundamental possibility projects our local reality, the penultimate reality, via electrons, quarks and the such, and/or strings, a hologram, consciousness or whatever. All is as it is in our local reality because it works. It gets down the reason that the all can have no limits, or it isn't the all. So it must be infinite and eternal, doing everything. That there is nothing to make it of still haunts. But we do observe a balance of polarity of charge, matter and antimatter, a weak and a strong nuclear force, and gravity's negative potential energy, said to balance the positive kinetic energy of stuff, not to mention fields making particles and particles making fields. So, there seems to be a balance of opposites, which is perhaps a zero balance. Nothing cannot be because it is perfectly unstable.
In a Theory of Everything forum long ago, in the 9th century, Abu Nasr Farabi wrote, "Vague and unrefined did the secrets of existence remain. Unpierced did that highly revered pearl remain. Each person said something according to his reason, yet untold did the point which was of essence remain." And Abul Hassan Karkwani replied in the forum in the 11th century, "The internet was slow in those days. The primordial secrets neither you know nor I. The words of the puzzle neither you can read nor I. Your discourse and mine are behind the curtain. When the curtain falls, neither you remain nor I." But they didn't know how far science would advance and that we would actually be able to see the curtain and derive the truth from it, so we may say more. "I've been thinking about fundamental possibility," I said to Passiona. "It solves a lot of problems. It's also what I've been leaning toward lately, although the wild toe revelations from imaginations have clarified it." "Like what?" she inquired. "Like how the penultimate reality, the fundamental substance, could still have existed forever, or at least in its potential form, and how its particular form was specifically one that worked instead of one that didn't." "It existed forever because time was born with it from possibility, the both of them always there as potential," she replied. "Yes, there was just what is rather than what was not. For a nothingness could never be, for there is surely something here, yet it need balance to nothing, since there is no other source." The fundamental substance was the most probable of all possibilities, she surmised. Yes, and perhaps it was the only possibility that would work. Or the others fizzled and failed by going nowhere, sort of a survival of the fittest of all the scenarios of consequences of what could serve as reality. And fundamental possibility had to exist, rather than not, for that's all there could be. Yet I'm still trying to adjust to this new way of thinking.
True, imagination chimed in. Fundamental possibility is a bit like your mind sifting through eventualities of possible actions, only this possibility forms substances. It may even be forming some now, here and there, but on a lesser basis than when the universe expanded, for then all was wide open. Or it is that even low probability event of huge bangs must ever and eventually happen. Of course, this possibility must remain simple in a way, that being the price of being fundamental, but you, a 13 billion year complex composite, are much more advanced, and that is where real and meaningful life occurs. If fundamental possibility could talk, which it can't, for it is not a system, it might say something much the same as you would now in your quest for the theory of everything. I'll follow every single avenue, whether it's brightly lit or a dark alley, exploring one ways, no ways, and dead ends, until cornered where the truth is hiding. And now you've arrived in that dark corner, and so you can live life better by knowing who you are. Some simple substance gave rise to everything, chosen as probable above the rest, knowing at once that it would function well, the most promising, the possible ones. However, unlike the simple beginnings, the possibilities of the complexities of everything are unbounded, and that's the greatest thing. As to how complex, there is no limit, except perhaps when it forms a black hole, and the smallest is the Planck distance, so size is absolute, not relative. All in all, you are the lucky one standing atop the pinnacle of time, change, form, and substance. Life is waiting when you have the right attitude. You will come to not even know what sorrow is. They continued on through the entangled forest. Our minds do seem to make the actual from the possible, don't they? She proposed. Well, possibility was our birthplace, so perhaps we retain a version of it, he answered. We create thought. The underwritten underwriter. Of this creational wave of matter covers all loss and liability, guaranteeing payment, by dipping into possibility. What random, unsystematic event became, so unmethodically, quite arbitrary, so lame, unplanned, undirected, so casual, uncasual made, as some indiscriminate, non-specific one bait of haphazard stray that erratic chance gave.
It was the in-between time of the trips of delivering the Army's supply system, and so I finally came down from the Hawaiian mountaintop to do some real work. And so I busied myself writing computer programs, surfing, taking a graduate course in some stuff that I already knew, selling seashells by the beach, and starting to seriously study the toe as well as her ankle and her knee.
It was the early 70s, still of the counterculture era, and I was in my early 20s, although it is now the 00s as I write this, and I'm wondering what kind of name the future will use to refer to this 00 decade. During the coming tens, or the teens perhaps, yet another problem decade, they might say back in the noughts, too old-fashioned. I mean back in the 00s, nope. It was the zeros maybe. The theory of everything was finally solved in the ToeQuest forums. I've settled on the UOs as a name, since it is a time of unease, but I will have to get Prof Pat to work on it. For meanwhile, in this story back then, he was starting on the road towards a grand professorship by taking accounting 101, the abacus. I was as free as a quark in the Army's nucleus when I was drafted into it, which wasn't too bad, since the strong force weakens near the quarks and lets them roam a bit. But I was soon promoted and projected into an electron, as Prof Pat's theory figures, and thus much freer to roam the world on the Army trips. Also, at about this time, Greybeard was heading for India, smartly taking his retirement early, before he had to work for the rest of his life, at a time when he was the most able. He now runs Australia's electrical system. Frederick and Nobody were on their way to a peace conference, but not their own, for their dispute was but a minor disagreement about whether nothing existed, but to resolve a battle between a country's north and south. Why does a country's east hardly ever go to war with its west? Well, the weeks went by, the seashells selling briskly, and the punched cards not having any hanging chad problems. And so I picked up the computer tapes to deliver to Vietnam, which was not my favorite destination. I decided to spice up the trip by taking a vacation from my life in Hawaii afterwards. Who would do that? But they gave me a month every year, by side-tripping to India, Pakistan, and Tibet, hoping to visit the mother of all mountaintops, the Himalayas. Around this time, Prof Pat actually began his 30-year experiments towards the theory that 3 interwoven superstrings were the quarks of the proton that give rise to all the sights and sounds of the twilight zone in which we live.
Meanwhile, McKirkpatrick was beginning his search for the one of consciousness, having found that 2 is 1 too many and that 3 is a crowd. Michael is often born again, although his mother's never really enjoyed going through this, and he did once find the secret of the one in a past life, but forgot it upon rebirth, for he was always very young when he was born. Currently, his house in England is flooding and floating away. Lucky that he mostly lives on a floatable lounge chair, and so he may have to flee to Turkey's hot climate to avoid these serious effects of global warming. I bid adieu to the archipelago and friends, saying I'll be back, long before Arnold made it popular, and then flew into the setting sun, but knew I wouldn't get burned since it would soon be night. However, the sun, which plummets like a stone in the tropics, was soon brought back up again, rising in the west, of all places, from the plane's progress. I should have gotten off while the world had stopped, but I did throw my bottle of whiskey out the window. It turns out that, in the future, Nobody had just finished his investigation of the Guardian of Forever, a megalithic monument found in the Star Trek episode, City on the Edge of Forever. It was a device placed by who knows whom that revealed all of history at a glance of near-universal speed. Luckily, Mr. Spock had recorded some of it on a tricorder that was built of subconscious neurons that could slow down time from its all-at-once superposition of all the possible pasts and futures. Dr. McCoy had stepped into the past and had changed the future by not letting a pacifist leader, Joan Collins, die. And so, Hitler had time to complete his heavy water experiments and to develop the atom bomb, and eventually rule the world. Such are the whims of fate that our world is subject to, kind of like the butterfly effect. This encounter was to send Nobody on the most super toe quest that any of us have ever attempted, going where no man has gone before. No, not to the ladies' room. A quest that to me and others is really quite amazing to follow. While the Guardian was the answer to our own galactic history, it was not the ultimate answer, but its workings were a good
I
start.
landed in Japan and took a commuter plane to Osaka near an Air Force base. There was no first-class seat from here on out, just a kind of chair in a cargo jet, one that carried tanks in the rear. It was so noisy that I wouldn't have been able to hear my iPod if it had been invented then. Longbin's airstrip was crowded, and so I maneuvered between many whirling tail rotors to a helicopter leaving for the nearby base. That night, some rockets landed at the other end of the base, and so someone fearlessly nicknamed Rascal Puff, an actual combat soldier, was sent out to quell the attack. He was rather impervious to injury, since he mostly resided in the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimensions, places that bullets usually missed by a mile or infinity. I remembered seeing posters back in New York saying that gravity is the 4th dimension, and so now I know it had to be him. Having made my first delivery of tapes that morning, a warrant officer then flew me 100 miles or more over the jungle to a remote base, noting that a previous courier's helicopter had been shot down. "I know," I replied. "That was one of my predecessors. I fly all the routes now." Even before that incident, the civil service workers hadn't really wanted this delivery job, for they had families or had gotten tired of it, and of course after the incident, didn't want any part of it whatsoever, but I saw it as adventure, and I still do. In Saigon's airport, I ran into who I now realize must have been Frederick being whisked away to the peace conference in a limo. I booked a flight to India for the next day and watched the conference on TV at my hotel. Frederick was showing a map of North and South Vietnam and was making great headway with the delegates. But he had to be honest and tell them that the North and South were forever oppositional, and that the twain could meet only as East meets West in transition. Hopes dimmed, but then nobody appeared out of thin air, having ridden waves of time displacement from the Guardian that were dilated by the delay of all the superpositions, and told the Vietnamese of both sides how they, as North and South, could get very close, infinitely close, and that they were much alike as well by meeting at the equator. But alas, their animosities were too deep, and the peace table collapsed as all the mad dogs went off howling into the night. Now in India I came across Greg Isaac Newton, who I now see was really greybeard, one who lived by his wits there. He was talking to the monkey man about anything and everything the theory of. Lloyd was ever busy helping the Irish fight the British, while R.P. Bibra, living back in his wild days, was shooting at Lloyd. I rode on the roof of a train towards Pakistan and later observed Greybeard buying some liquids at the duty-free shop while I waited to fly toward the mountains of Tibet. I climbed the Himalayas and complained to the wise Lama up there that life could be hell. He said, "Get lost, go make a heaven of hell, and then me tell. The door is never shut on the prison cell, so why would you ever want to stay inside it when the door is always so wide open?" He also gave me a piece of paper that had "All is three" written on it, which I couldn't figure out. He wouldn't tell me. I just came across the other day, realizing that it meant matter in motion through space.
In the beginning, or rather, in the absence of a true beginning, there exists an eternal and fundamental substance that serves as the foundation of all reality. Some may call it the quantum foam or strings, while others may refer to it as possibility. However, I prefer to call it energy. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed, and therefore it has no beginning or end. It is the building block of elementary particles and forces. Energy has always existed, either being made from nothing or continuously being created. It is the only non-composite entity that is possible, making it the ultimate source of everything. All higher complexities, including the mind and matter, are constructed upon the flexible base of energy. It is stronger than Atlas, who stood on the back of a turtle, as energy has no lower foundation to rely on. It upholds not only the world, but everything that exists, including the mind and matter. Energy is omnipresent, present everywhere, even in the vacuum. It is the absolute reality, the ultimate ground of all existence, the mother of all reality and the eternal. At the fundamental level, energy is all that exists. There is nothing lower than energy, as it is self-sustaining. It is what it is, just like the statement, "I am what I am." Those who refer to energy as the ground of determination are correct, but they make a mistake when they attribute personality or characteristics to it. Energy is not a person, being, alien, or superbeing. It does not possess temperament or any other composite qualities. It is far from being fundamental and absolute. While there may be higher beings such as aliens, they are not the ultimate or absolute. They are composite like us and are dependent on and exist after the ground of ultimate reality or energy.
Anyway, this energy is a simple thing, being such a fundamentally low building block. But this does not preclude the possibility of it being very close at hand in its basic and fundamental non-composite form. We learn from physics that everything in the universe seems to be connected, entangled with everything else, especially at this basic level of energy. For example, in photon pairs that are created and become separated by distances far larger than the speed of light could traverse, either photon snaps to in an instant when the other photon is randomly polarized and changes its own polarization to match it precisely. It is as if the two distant photons are still the same particle in some other dimension, or that they remain connected in some way forever. Well, it has been said that when an electron vibrates, the universe rumbles. This connection of everything to everything may provide some rudimentary perception in and of itself that is tapped into by the brain. We might even define energy as having some awareness itself. This is made ever more plausible by the fact that energy does indeed give rise to all that we know, to all mind and consciousness, as well as to all matter. Quotes used because matter may turn out just to be some swirling energy that gives the appearance of solidity. At any rate, the capability for conscious awareness does seem to be a natural, like mass or energy, but it definitely requires a brain process, and it surely comes last, not first, after the brain takes its requisite time to perform an analysis. Could it be that everything is really globally connected in some other dimension, although still as real as could be, but projected in our three dimensions, the extra dimension being something like all possibilities existing at once in superposition, just as in the quantum world? Anyway, these were my early thoughts.
After leaving Tibet, I rented a motorcycle and headed for Calcutta, carrying some liquid refreshments on the back to resell, via Greybeard's method of wholesale and retail. I heard that nobody had stepped into the Guardian of Forever again and had gone into the past, back toward the beginning, being careful not to touch or do anything that would change history or the future. But he sneezed, and so now our alphabet has only 26 letters, some having to do double duty, this causing many Toe forum posts not to be understood. Furthermore, it greatly delayed the discovery of the digit 0. Back in Hawaii, I attended a lecture given by Professor Pat at the university on his loss of energy of something like 1 billion universes, during which he wondered where all the energy had gone. Meanwhile, he had been taking pep pills to make up for it. Pat's 30 years theory of 000, 111 was moving right along, he having had just taken a month or so to choose a high-tech method of presenting his theory, finally settling on a #2 pencil. Currently, he is solving the Big Bang via two oppositely rotating yin-yangs of matter and antimatter. Not a bad theory, actually. I had to attend a barracks inspection, in which our short, 5 feet tall captain stood on a chair and checked for dust on a high cabinet. But it was clean, for I'd wiped it while not having much to do beforehand, since my bunk was always perfect since I'd never slept in it. In fact, I'd never even registered into the barracks, having found a bed frame and having gotten fresh linens from the quartermaster. And so I even had to add my name to the latrine detail so no one would wonder why it was never there. How come someone's measurement of height is always tall and never short? And why is a doorway size always so many inches wide, even when it's narrow? Nobody, did you hiccup in the time machine? Lately, like now in 2012, I have discovered that depth is the third dimension, and have also cured myself of the fear of heights. But now, I'm afraid of widths, since my stomach is growing. I have also discovered that the base of reality is only two-dimensional, but upon shining a spiritual laser-type light through it, the third dimension is projected as in a hologram. I am now rearranging the waves of my interference pattern to make it look like I am much thinner. Back in the past, the white-gloved hand of the MP waved us into the fort, and we rode up to the mountaintop, stopping along the way to look behind a bush and see a sheer drop down to the licky highway, where a bunch of toy cars were rolling along. Darkness fell like an anvil, and we could see the lights of Pearl City off to the west beyond the Punch Bowl, the beautiful and green National Cemetery of the Pacific. The Hawaiian alphabet has only 12 letters, 6 vowels, and 6 consonants. Nobody. Did anything else happen? We cooked some chicken fingers and buffalo wings. This doesn't make sense, nobody. On the hibachi, and then settled down for dessert. I caressed Pasiona's tresses in romantic rhythm to the contented sighs she sent toward heaven. She slumbered where the grass fledged the cliff, half awake or asleep in love's peaceful dream. As I loved and was loved in completeness, the earthly world with all of its foolishness, work, hurry and scurry, pain and worry, did fast fade away into nothingness.
But it wasn't the theory of nothing that we were working on, but the toe up to the thigh bone. So we assessed ourselves floating around in a far arm of the galaxy on a spinning globe in the middle of nowhere and said, "What the hell?" and stared up into the night sky, begging it to reveal its secrets. The evening caressed us in its gentle way of softness and warmth, but there is no sex allowed in toe forums. So we implored the night, in this gentle darkness and quiet stillness, to yield her dearest secrets, to unveil before us the full truth of what she was. Much we already knew from twilight dreams that bordered on insight, and from Keats' poems unveiling truth and beauty. But we asked with our most inquiring looks and yearning hearts, to gain more knowledge of the deep mysteries of all that was. Above us, fires burned the stars away. Below us, the earth turned under our feet. Within us, unworded dreams haunted our souls. Around us, the night poured blackness on the ground. So we asked of the powers of the night, not immortality, for that would have been too much, nor youth, for we already had it, but for the insight to see through the dark and on into the life of things, of what all things were made. I couldn't have ended with a preposition, an error, saying what all things are made of. However, if some know-it-all ever calls you on it, just add, "You dumb shit," after the preposition upon pretending to correct it, and to explain nobody's wanderings, as the poor lady had to say to the upper crust, after, "Where you from? Where you from, bitches?" The night answered that all was as it was because it had to be. Well, that was difficult to understand, but we did retain a presence of the night within us, vibrating with its rhythm and resonance. We sensed a soft sweep across our heartstrings, for we were willing spirits, and were totally undistracted by the day's bright noise. In harmony, we realized that we each held within ourselves the seed of the other, that yin reaches climax, then retreats in yang's favor, in a cyclic movement of rotational symmetry, for a rounded life is the blend of yin and yang.
We saw Greybeard returning home to Australia, which is not the world's largest island, for it is a continental landmass. Greenland is the largest island and will actually become green soon when global warming transforms it. As for the longest island, that would be Long Island. Other names of places that took 0 seconds to think of are Iceland and Newfoundland. Greybeard told us that he would have to turn upside down after he'd passed the equator, so as to become right side up in the land down under. What a joker, or is it true? The Philippines was hot and humid even in December, and so one had to make friends with the blood, sweat and tears, for only a trickle of water came from the faucets and showers. At night I noticed that Orion had 3 hunting dogs, not 2, and there were probably even more dogs south of the moon where Greybeard lives on Google Earth at S2728.775 E15302. 545. Furthermore, I saw the North Star and the Southern Cross in the same sky, but the looking up at this great conjunction caused me to trip hard over a small long bump in the dirt labelled the Equator. And I did indeed turn upside down. Getting up, I stood astride the equator, one of my brain hemispheres in the northern hemisphere and the other in the southern. I'm not sure how to tell Frederick about this. On our free time, we travelled deep into the jungle and met a tribe who had no previous human contact, although they had heard that there was no point to the first dimension. They kept busy hunting and food gathering, living a 168-hour work week. I gave them the gift of the digit 0, so they could learn to relax and do nothing sometimes. So far, they only had the digits 1, 2, few, several, and many. Their only real question was about Paris Hilton. More seriously, I was stunned when they unveiled some ancient words carved into rock. The only purpose of life is to be finding your own meaning therein, but some questions still remain, such as what is life and its point? To find the answer, one must live it fully with goodness.